To dive right back in, I am going to take some time to review for those of you that weren't able to be with us last week. So I'll review part one, and then we'll go into part two, which is divine alignment. So we'll talk a little more about what that means, but also put it into practice. And so to start off today, we're going to do a reflection. My offering or invitation is to invite you to grab a piece of paper and something to write with. This can be scratch paper, it can be from a journal if you have one. I wrote mine out on a journal that's this size initially, so it doesn't need to be anything big. Could be sticky notes. If you have some of those in front of you, you could use multiple sticky notes, but just make sure that you have something to write with for your eyes only, of course. So we'll start with the reflection. Again, we'll do review. And when we get to this part about looking at our fragmented parts, that's when we'll dive into some practice and you'll need that piece of paper. For now, I'd love to invite you into a self-reflection and maybe we can do some sharing in the chat. I invite you to remember one moment in which compassion was extended to you in a very memorable way. So, one moment in which you maybe were struggling, maybe you were having a hard time, or something difficult was coming up. Um, Take your mind's eye back to the difficulty, but then shift toward the ways in which you felt seen by that other person. Focus on what it felt like to experience their empathy and to be understood by them. Did you experience their warmth or a sense of their positive regard or unconditional care? And in what ways, perhaps in hindsight, could you sense the presence of the sacred in their compassion as they were extending it toward you? Okay. So that's the invitation here to just reflect and hold those questions. And we're going to take about 30 seconds. I would advise that you don't choose something too distressful. So I have this SUD scale here. Let's maybe try to keep it four or less, something that maybe created moderate distress. We want to be mindful, of course, always, certainly here in this virtual realm of our bodies. And so nothing too activating um, is the invitation. Okay. So take a couple seconds. If it helps, you can jot down what you noticed about the experience and how you felt afterwards, or you can just sort of reflect on that. And then we'll come back together and maybe share out in the chat what we noticed. Okay. Okay. Well, I hope that was enough, I would say, to maybe kind of get the wheels in your mind turning. But would I love to invite anyone to either come off mute or to drop in the chat just what that was like. What did you notice?
Are you asking what did the moment that you asked about feel like, or what did doing the reflection feel like?
Yeah, thank you for clarifying, Tawana. Yeah, just what you noticed during that moment. So what was it like to receive or be the recipient of compassion in that moment? What made it compassionate or anything else that's coming up right now? Yeah, thanks,
So
Tawana.
the moment that came to mind for me was I started spiritual direction, and I was just talking about um, the way that that's it's been ingrained in me that I have to take care of people all the time. That
Mhm,
if pieces drop, I have to be the one to pick it up. And I'm the oldest daughter of six, and she also is the oldest daughter. And so, as I was describing the way I was feeling, um, she was also identifying with it and basically saying that she's had similar experiences, and some of that comes from being the oldest daughter. So,
mhm,
in that moment, I just felt understood. I felt kind of like relief because sometimes you can feel like you're the only person that has ever experienced it when nobody else understands what that kind of stuff feels like.
mhm, mhm, mhm. Oh, yes, you hit the nail on the head for me, Tawana. Yeah, feeling understood. 'Cause sometimes we can stay in our heads, and while the feeling is so strong, then sometimes there's, at least for me, a part of me that comes in and is like, but should I be feeling that way? Maybe I should just get over it, right? So that is spot on for me. Thank you. Mhm. Yeah, anyone else?
It's there. So yeah, like I mentioned during the community builder, that like I do a lot of work and teaching at the intersection of chemistry and Black studies, and I started this work in Texas, and it was very stressful and difficult because there was a lot of pushback. But I had this professor, an organic chemistry professor, and he was my former professor when I was a student at Rice as well. But they weren't Black, they were European. But when I tell you they put language to Afrochemistry in a way that I could not, I felt like there was this community, this transcendence, this sort of like, how could they know how to, you know, define, what I was doing at the intersection of chemistry and Black studies, less, God revealed it to them. Um, yeah, so that was, I guess, what I was thinking about during this time.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. That's so good. That piece about community and transcendence, which community came up last week, right? With Tawana. Tawana, you mentioned that same felt experience. So, oh, so good. Thank you. Mhm.
There's also a comment in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see it.
Oh, perfect. Yes. Would anyone like to read that? I
I,
cannot.
I
Thank
can read it. It says
Okay.
there are several moments, especially when my father passed away. My supervisor has shown compassion toward me. He
Mm,
actually does that with everyone he supervises at my job.
mhm. Yeah, so in a time that's tender, a time of loss, your supervisor, and oh, that must feel so good coming from that level too, right? Just knowing that um, your grief is being affirmed and understood at your place of work and by your supervisor. Yeah, really nice. Thank you all so much. And definitely feel free to interrupt me, drop more things in the chat, or just come off mute. But we're gonna say, hold that in mind. Hold that thought about what compassion is, what it feels like to really experience it deeply. Even if there are no words exchanged, right? think really kind of in that spiritual way of just like embodying that, soaking all of that in, because we're going to come back to compassion for our practice. We're going to do a compassion practice. Okay. But first, I'll review for those of us that missed last week. Last week, we talked about abundance from, and that's sort of this whole theme, right? But we talked about abundance from the lens of the macro kind of collective level and what that is and what that might be like. We talked about how the Old Testament gives us a lens of abundance from, again, this collective level. What I kind of liken it to when looking at Exodus 3 and Numbers 13 is that maybe could it be that the Old Testament is giving us more of a prototype or an archetype of abundance in these two narratives? And could that be just an invitation to reflect on what collective abundance looks like at that level? So we read these two scriptures, and these were our anchored scriptures.
Aryn,
Yeah.
it's Ross. One quick thing, if it's okay, right here.
Hmm.
The scriptures you raised last week bubbled
Hmm.
up something for me that's
Hmm.
that makes these really, really rich.
Hmm.
I don't know who Rebecca would cast as Abraham, but but like the and pardon the pun, but the Genesis for these scriptures, when I was, you just like dusted off some cobwebs, was when God told Abraham, well, he probably was Abram at that point, go look out at the stars. And I think about you when you were talking about the abundance. That's like first glimpse of what we see in Exodus and Numbers when he was invited to say your descendants will be like so numerous you can't even count these stars. And in that same moment, he does reveal to him that there will be in captivity for 400 years. And that's what your scriptures are bringing them to that point of coming out of that. So it's just really rich when I thought about that whole narrative, and that it's like that multiplicity and that abundance was being presented in that initial moment to be invited to look at the stars. And so these are those descendants in Exodus and Numbers and what you raised. So just like that little thread was really, really rich. So just want to share that. So thank you.
That, oh, yes, Ross, that is so good. I just got this image of just the black sky just with endless stars, right? Oh,
Yeah.
if that isn't abundance, I don't know what is, right? That is beautiful, beautiful. And yes, these are the descendants, right? That get to experience this lush and beautiful land that is overflowing with resources, with abundant love, with the sacred. Thank you so much, Ross. That was beautiful. Yeah.
Thank
Anything
you.
else? Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. Anything else coming up around our anchor scriptures? Okay. If anything else comes up again, don't hesitate to just jump right in, interrupt me. We then, let me go back a little bit, shifted towards the micro and what abundance is like at the micro level. And that's where we really hovered, and that's where we're going to hover even more today. And we looked at examples of abundance through the New Testament lens. And we talked about how Jesus just has all of these rich examples, parables, right, that he provides where abundance is abundant. So we have Jesus feeding the 5,000, Jesus is turning water into wine, all these examples where there is more than enough. And in the narratives, it's spoken about literal, of course, but we know that doesn't need to be, right? And that sort of is the point that Jesus is making. And so those were our scriptural references. And then we looked at abundance and we defined it both at the collective and the individual level. And I love how these wisdom teachers talk about abundance. They talk about it through the lens of an interior freedom and it moving outward from there. And so I'll just invite you back into these quotes. I'm not going to read them and we won't spend too much time on them today, but just refresh your memory. And for those of you that haven't seen this for the first time, I'll invite you to take a few seconds just to take in their words. Okay. And so all of this is leading us towards and led us towards last week, this concept of interior freedom. When we look at and think about interior freedom, we're talking about a grounded contemplative awareness of what's happening inside and outside that frees us from either conscious or unconscious drivenness, right? So we're no longer overwhelmed by the noise. Instead, we are feeling aligned with the sacred. And then, of course, we have to be real, right? And being real, I said that is not always my experience. I do not always just move or float through the world with this interior freedom or the awareness of it. Um, and that's because there are things that get in the way because we're human of our interior freedom. And those things are the illusion of separateness and dividedness. We all have a core self that is created in the image of the divine and the sacred. And when we are in alignment with that core self or in alignment with abundance, we do feel liberated. We all know what that feels like too, because we've all experienced it and everyone has a core self. But because of life, just being life, and many of these things that are on the right, we talked about how that experience of interior freedom can cause us to, or these things on the right, excuse me, can cause us to feel alienated from that interior freedom or disconnected from that interior freedom. And in that place, we are then left with drivenness, a scarcity mindset, and again, alienation. And so this is where we're going to hover today. How can we come back out of that place of dividedness? Okay. We went into more detail about the alienated self. Today, we will zoom into what it's like to be in the alienated self or operating as our alienated selves. In this place, we are overwhelmed by emotions. There are internal narratives and dialogue that churns up. For me, it can be a whole day of rumination sometimes if I am really disconnected and not grounded. And that's okay. That happens. We're human, right? It also can manifest in our bodies. So that's sometimes where the tension comes from. That's where sore throat comes from. The other week, all of a sudden, I started feeling on the left side of my neck, the lower left side, just like a quick, tightness. Ooh, and it hurt. I don't know where it can, yes, I do know where it came from, but in the moment, I was like, where did this come from? This hurts so bad. Right. So I was definitely in that alienated self and needed to give it more attention. So that's where we're going today. How can we give the alienated self more attention? This alienated self, we're going to talk about today, manifests in three ways. Firefighters, managers, and exiles that all have either fears that are unsoothed, longings that are unsatisfied, aching wounds, or maybe gifts that are underdeveloped or being stifled. So the alienated self has these flags or these distorted cries that fragment us. So we're going to talk about what do we do, first of all, with this experience of dividedness? What is it like to be fragmented? And then we're going to practice um, really coming back into alignment, really shifting back towards our awareness of abundance. Okay. I like what Cynthia Bourgeois says about this concept of being divided or,
Okay.
oh,
Okay. No, thank you.
oh, okay. I think someone just came off of mute. I thought that was a question. Mhm. Okay. Okay. If you do have a question, though, definitely again interrupt. But she says that we are sort of conditioned, if you will, to divide our humanity. We're conditioned to sort of focus on one path only or the right quote unquote way of doing things and showing up to the point where we don't know how to give ourselves the opportunity to get to know some of those parts that don't quote unquote seem like they want the right thing or they're doing the quote unquote right thing, right? I'm going to keep using those air quotes because we don't want to be dualistic and stay in right or wrong. But again, that's what we're taught. That is absolutely what we're taught, and particularly religion gives that to us, right? The problem is, and as Cynthia Bourgeois says, without giving all of the parts of ourselves the opportunity to weigh in, she says in decision making, but I say in daily life, we may be self-sabotaging by living in a way or existing in a way that doesn't allow us to honor all of those parts. And so for that, we're going to honor our whole selves. That's why we're here today. We're going to do so through a compassion based practice that is called compassion based spiritual direction. It is an approach to companioning others, but it can also just be an approach for loving and nurturing ourselves, tending to ourselves. It's anchored in contemplative spiritual direction, but also in a compassion process. And this is literally called the compassion process or compassion practice, which comes out of Dr. Frank Roger Jr.'s research. And then the third component is internal family systems, which I know some of you are familiar with. Basically, with internal family systems or with IFS, the concept or the takeaway is that our personalities are multiple, not singular. So none of us are all one thing, right? Not all good, not all bad. I don't like good and bad anyway. I don't typically ascribe to those things, but none of us is all one thing. Instead, we are composed of parts. And the first part we did talk about last week is our core self. The core self is the truest, most clearest part of us. It can be both personal and transpersonal, we talked about. So sometimes really goes beyond us. That transcendence that Brooke mentioned when compassion was received from the professor, right? It goes beyond us. It is very much so about our core essence, but there's this ripple effect, right? And it's felt by the people that are in our immediate orbit. It also is our uniqueness, our character, our authenticity, and it is recognized as a higher level of consciousness within us. Often, though, it it sort of appears as our conscience, but really, again, important for us to recognize it as our higher level of consciousness at work in us, because it's not something that is small in any way. It is the biggest, most truest part of us, and it's the part that helps us to access abundance. Okay, so that's the first part. Second part is broken up into two different parts, which are our protector parts. And these parts we're going to talk a little bit more about, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but just want to highlight that these protective parts are associated with what Father Thomas Keating calls the false self. And you all are no strangers to this concept, so I know I don't need to spend a lot of time here, but want you to think about the protectors in alignment with these emotional programs for happiness, right? They're the parts of us that are linked to our survival. And whenever we are grasping for any of these emotional programs, it's all in service of us, right? Of protecting us, of making sure that we don't, insert any blank, collapse, go hungry, you know, completely spiral. Okay, so the protectors are very egoic, but they're very protective, and it is important that we don't villainize them. Okay, they are there for us. So the first protector part, we call them managers because they are very preventative, like a manager would be. Their goal or their job is to keep our wounds suppressed, to keep us from experiencing emotional harm, which every human being has experienced. But because their intention is to avoid harm, they sort of act as this safeguard. They want to protect us from vulnerability or being overwhelmed or experiencing trauma or re-traumatizing ourselves. And so they work really, really, really hard, again, in this proactive, preventative way. They are also our internalized highest sort of voices, or the voices of our highest spiritual striving. So this a lot of times sounds like you should do this, or that's not the Christian way, or what's right is versus what's wrong. So they should a lot, if you will. Okay. And they show up as pleasers, worriers, caretakers, critics, controllers, planners, overachievers, perfectionists, workaholics, you name it. They work hard, is the point, but they work hard in service of us. Okay. The next protective part, and the last protective part, is our firefighting parts. The firefighting parts are reactive, so they're literally the opposite. They are not proactive or preventative, they are reactive, which means that they don't show up unless a wound has been triggered, unless a little sore spot has been struck or unveiled. And this can be conscious or unconscious, right? But their goal is to, when we are triggered, they basically have this knee-jerk response that is not as concerned about the outcome or the consequence. It mostly is just concerned about attending to the pain and sort of cutting it off, which is why they're called firefighters, right? Firefighters, actual firefighters, are not concerned about how much of your furniture they ruin if the house is on fire, right? They're not going to say, oh, don't spray that, you know, $5,000 couch. It costs too much money. No, they're going to damage the couch to put out the fire. That's what our firefighters do. They're very reactive, and they can be quietly reactive too, right? They don't always have to be really big. Sometimes they're just avoidant, right? Or sometimes they just roll their eyes. Ooh, I have some of those that love a good eye roll. They can distract us, which is quiet, right? Or they can blame internally or externally. But the point is that they're impulsive, usually they're reactive, they're extreme. Okay. Okay. So those are our two protective parts, and they are all working really hard, particularly the managers work really hard to protect us from our exiles or our wounded parts. Our wounded parts are burdened. They're often very young because we experience hurt very young as humans. They're vulnerable and they carry usually pain, but feelings of betrayal. They can sometimes carry trauma and they're held and remembered as memories. Sometimes they're held as cognitive or physical sensations that will manifest in the body, all because of their distorted beliefs. And so our goal is to try to help unburden them. That's what we're wanting to do. Okay, so you can kind of think as the protectors as standing in front of the exiles. That's their job to protect. So I'm going to shift into a practice. I'm going to illustrate it through a really quick story, give a little context, just so that you have an idea so that you can practice for yourself. So at this point, this is where you're going to need your pen and your paper or something to write with in a piece of paper. Okay. Okay, so I was working with a contract, on a contract, excuse me, with an organization that I really respected. Things were so great. Our missions were perfectly aligned, and we had established a really great rapport and working relationship. So it was like perfect. Chef's kiss. Don't think I could have found better partners. Until one day, things took a turn when it was time to pay the invoice and I did not get paid. Okay, that happens, right? Sometimes. So my initial reaction is, okay, we can fix this. Let's fix this. We got to fix this. So I scheduled a meeting to determine a way forward. We met, we established an agreement. Cool, great. Yes. Huh, phew. Everything's going to be okay. Until the contract point of contacts became very hard to reach. So essentially, they ghosted me for a period of time. I'm chuckling. I'm so glad I can laugh at this point. At that point, it was not funny at all. So here is where, again, the practice comes in. Lots of parts of me got churned up. In particular, I had a few managers churn up. I would say there were a total of maybe four very prominent parts that churned up. Today, I'm just going to cover three so that you have time to kind of try this for yourself. But at that time and in that situation, my manager, first manager, she and I, oh, we go together so bad. She is a daily companion, and I am constantly in communication with her. And I have named her Aryn Childs because I've named her after Tony Childs, which is Jill Marie Jones's character in the 2000 sitcom Girlfriends. I'm sure you all are very familiar with Girlfriends. But I call her this because she's a very strong inner critic. And like Tony Childs, she has a really kind of fiery attitude, but she also is a perfectionist, likes things to be put together, is quick to blame, especially when she feels challenged or threatened. And for me, this version of myself is only about 20 years old, right? So she came along pretty early, I would say, in my adulthood. So she is really loud at this point, and she's like, another career disappointment? Are you serious? And how did they mess this up? And how did you end up here in the first place? How did I end up here? Why are we here? Right? So she was very loud. The second part that was triggered mainly because Aaron Childs was so loud was the my firefighter. And my firefighter I call Nubia Gabrielle. She's Nubia when she is burdened. She is Gabrielle when she is unburdened. I visualize this part of me as an animated character, like one of the Gross Sisters from the Proud Family, if you all are familiar with that animated sitcom or animated series, rather. I call her Nubia, like one of the Girl Sisters because she's a tough defender. So the Girl Sisters are known as being these bullies that literally take money from people. Um, she doesn't take money, but like the Girl Sisters, my Nubia takes her money seriously. She's not a bully, but don't push her. Okay. She can really use some intimidating language inside of me. She likes a good curse word too. But her goal is just to really focus on making sure that I'm not taken advantage of, right? And so she sort of swells up very impulsively and very extremely in situations where she feels like there might be a threat in her mind, this is not okay, and they're not going to pay you. They're trying to run, so you need to do something fast, right? So that's the firefighter. The last part of me that I'll quickly illustrate is the exile. So this part of me doesn't necessarily have a name, but I do know that it comes out of intergenerational trauma. It doesn't have a name because it carries the pain of my lineage. So my parents, my grandparents, my great grandparents. This part of me I know is birthed out of, like I said, intergenerational trauma, but the trauma of poverty, oppression, racial capitalism, all of those things that were passed down to me, all of those beliefs and concepts that were passed down to me, right? It carries the burden of those things. And this part of me believes at all times, in a very unrational way, that I am only one paycheck away from homelessness. Doesn't matter what's happening or how well things are going, but that's what is going to happen, and that is my situation, is what this part believes. Okay, so ultimately, I have these three parts that are working together. What I'm going to show you is how we can sort of walk with these parts of ourselves when
And
we are.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Erin. Would
Mhm.
you, because I looked at your whole diagram and I really identify with the Karen Kelly part of you. Would
Yeah,
you mind describing that one?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So Karen Kelly, she is a caretaker and a bit of a martyr. So the first thing she would think in a situation like this is, oh, well, okay, maybe we can just let it go, right? This organization is clearly struggling. No one ghosts you in a professional situation like this unless something is really serious. So they must be going through something. It's okay. You can let it go. So she's very self-sacrificing. Um, doesn't see the bigger picture, just always jumps into the mode of fixing. And a lot of times that fixing comes with pleasing too. Mhm. So
Thank
what
you.
can I do for them? How can I extend my deepest love for them, while also showing them, of course I want to get paid, but what's going on with them is where Karen Kelly comes in. And how can I help them fix what they have going on? And maybe they don't have a system. I can help them with systems. Yeah, we're good at creating systems. Let's do that, is how that part of me typically shows up.
Okay, thank you.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for the question. So that's our invitation. Our practice is how can we, when we get in these situations where we're experiencing dividedness, we've sort of stepped out of the self and we've shifted into that alienated self where abundance feels so far out of reach and probably not on our radar, right? Because the thing is that is happening is that real, it's that big, it's that distressing, it's that human. How can we take a little bit of time with those parts of us? And what I again would offer is by trying to map out what's coming up for you, not trying to rush yourself towards that highest stance that you can take, right? Or rush yourself towards right, or what might be the noble thing to do. But just to kind of give the other parts of you an opportunity to weigh in, to be heard. And so, what I'd offer in a situation like this is that you sit down in your prayer time or your quiet time and just in the middle of your page, write self or true self. Or you can write your name. But then just start to jot down what the narratives are, right? What are the fears and the worries? What are the beliefs that are churning up about yourself, about others, about the world? What emotions start to come into the forefront? What role do you feel like you need to play in the situation? Right? So, how are all the parts of you coming up? And we looked at that compassionate situation because right now, and sort of as we move into our closing, I would invite you to think back to that compassionate situation and maybe just take a moment to jot down what were the parts of you that were showing up in that moment. Okay. So I'm going to give you a few moments to hold that, and then we will wrap up. Okay, I know, of course, that was not nearly enough time. And what I will tell you is that this does take time. Mapping, I think, is a great first step, but it's not all the steps, right? It just is sort of designed to get us to a place where we can again see ourselves and move back towards alignment. I like to, again, take the one part that is the loudest that day or in that moment, and I like to just offer it to the sacred in my quiet time. So sometimes when I sit down for centering prayer, the thought is, um, I'm just going to be doing centering prayer. And because the part is so loud, I have to offer that. I have to surrender that in a centering prayer practice or a series of centering prayer practices across days, right? The goal is not to rush ourselves back to that place of alignment, but just to constantly be able to companion and compassionately witness our parts. That is the goal. This bringing a contemplative awareness, once we've mapped out or we've webbed out our parts, really does invite a non-reactive stance, a stance that is non-projective, a stance that allows us to listen to our deepest cries, to tend to our hurts, to uncover the mystery of the particularities of the situation, right? And the way that we're seeing the situation or any difficult situation. And then what we can do is we can introduce a loving kindness and an unconditional positive regard that allows ourselves to be moved by ourselves, but also by the sacred. So essentially, we go through this process of just inviting communication with the part once we are able to get that pen and paper out and web out the parts. Then we ask one part, which part wants to come forward? Which part is the loudest? And that's the part that we listen to and we can be in dialogue with. We can then ask them questions. So I'll go back to Aryn Childs. Again, she's a daily companion. Sometimes I don't have an opportunity because I'm with clients to necessarily talk back to the part in an extended way, but sometimes I just do so in a brief way. What do you need right now, Aryn Childs? What would be supportive to you right now? What can I do right now? Right? And just even observing that part and holding that little bit of space brings so much compassion to ourselves. And even in doing that, we are inviting in the sacred. We're moving back into that place of abundance because it's the awareness that this is just one part of us. It's just one part, right? And we are not separate. We are not separate from the divine. So that's the compassionate witnessing process. I am going to again say this is the first step in a very long process that we did today, but the goal is again shifting back to our true self so that we can shift back into alignment with abundance and to be very patient with yourself in this process. If we try to rush ourselves, now we're bringing forth more managers, right? So we don't want to rush this process, but just give a little space, give a little time for ourselves to be seen by ourselves, to behold all the parts of ourselves, and then to also be seen by the sacred. In closing, if there are any questions that you have, or if you want to learn more about this work, or if you just want to talk through some of what was mentioned today or some of what is coming up for you, my email address is here. It is Aryn at the Milk and Honey House for Wellbeing.com. Milk and Honey House is my practice. I am a spiritual director and a psychotherapist. And the work that I do is all about abundance, all about bringing us back into that place of abundance. So I welcome any conversations and any ways that I can journey with and companion you all. Thank you all so much. Blessings, and I will turn it back over to Andrea.
I had a question actually before you turn it over there. Well, I had a question and a comment. I was wondering if I could see the slide that came before the alienated self, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
And while you're looking for that, I can tell you my comment. So when we went to the mapping exercise, I didn't exactly follow instructions and I picked something that I know that I'm going to need to work on after this that has a lot of emotion tied to it. And as I was even thinking through the questions, I could feel the emotions rising up.
Mhm.
And one of the things you said um, about going through the process is that you can offer the loudest part of yourself to the sacred in your quiet time. And
Mhm.
what I was thinking is before I probably get to that, I probably need to just welcome those emotions because there was a lot of emotions that came up for me. So probably the welcome in prayer would be a start before I even get to silence.
Exactly, Tawana. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Yes, this is also, and I heard you say you have a spiritual director. This is a
Yes.
process that we go through in spiritual direction. And so imagine having 75 minutes, 90 minutes just to focus on one part and all that that part is bringing up, right? And then going forward out from there and meeting, allowing the part to meet your practices, introducing the part to your practices, centering prayer, journaling, walking and praying, whatever your spiritual practices are. But you hit the nail on the head. It's a very slow process because we want to, again, do the deep work, not just kind of do what life and culture has taught us how to do, right? Is rush, rush, rush toward that feeling of freedom and healing. Healing is a process and it takes time. So I love that you named that because it's exactly that. Yeah, give it time, let it be mad. Sometimes Tony Childs and Nubia, just because I use those two parts of myself today, sometimes they're fine. They'll go to bed. I can see them just laying down, and then I wake up because Nubia's loud again, right? So then we kind of go back through it again. But the goal is to continue to bring compassion to ourselves. Yeah, at every moment. So thank you so much for that, Tawana. That's so.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And I was asking about the slide right before this one.
Oh, okay. It was this one. Okay.
Yes. Thank you.
Absolutely. Hmm.
Aryn, can you unpack a little bit that fourth bullet on the slide that Tawana is highlighting right now, related as it relates to the alienated self, please?
Yeah, so this one,
Uh-huh.
images, daydreams, fantasies. Yeah. Oh, yes. So the images, daydreams, fantasies, for me, that's again that ruminating. So, in the case like this, maybe Aaron Childs is like, well, you should have had a better process in place for them to pay you. That's why they didn't pay you. And when you go into that meeting, this is how the meeting is going to go. You're going to say this, and then they're going to say that. And that's how you're going to respond when they say that. And you know what? If they say that thing that they said last week to you again, you can bring back up this part, right? So there becomes like this whole conversation that I'm essentially having in my head by myself or that the part is having.
Mhm.
Or sometimes it is a fantasy that maybe from within like a more positive example, things are going to go so great. They're going to be so amazing. I have one part of me that is so optimistic all the time, and she fantasizes about the most perfect outcomes. My husband always says my job is to think about how everything's going to go wrong because you're going to think about how everything's going to go right. And so that part fantasizes and daydreams about just the best possible outcomes at all times. So yeah, it can look any ways, our own kind of fantasies of how things are going to go or how things should be going is what that bullet is meant to cover.
Thank you.
No problem, Ross. Okay. Well, if all hearts and minds are settled, I will stop sharing and turn it back over to Andrea.
Thank you, Aryn, for that wonderful presentation. I should have known psychotherapy was in there. You have that nice soothing, soothing voice. And when I saw the presentation, I was like, wait, she's speaking my language. So thank you so much for reminding us definitely about the integration, because we are seeing a lot of division of this or that, men, women, black, white, whatever. And so just the offering of the divide itself, that we can no longer be divided within ourselves, allows us to better see how we can welcome and integrate others and see them for who they are. Just as Aisha shared with the blessing of, let me look at just the person and not these ideas. So thank you again for that. And thank you everyone for all of your contributions to helping awakenings today. So now we're at the blessing, at the offering. And the offering, as you've heard Pastor Tia say all the time, no one is judging it. It's just your investment in our community so that we may continue to do this work. Because we see ourselves as a global community. We don't just offer here, we support where we are led to support. I can say that when I came to awakenings early on, and I was learning the practice of contemplation. It was right at the time that Harvey occurred, and I know that because of that practice of the contemplative practice of sitting, I was able to navigate Harvey with my family. At the time, my mother's home was flooded significantly, and she was overwhelmed. She was out of town when it happened. And I'm sharing this because there were a lot of churches doing outreach. I was a part of a bigger church before I came here, and they weren't not able to extend the outreach out that people thought. But Awakenings, at the time, the leadership had people with Airbnbs that they connected together and put families in Airbnbs. And I remember Tia calling me and asking for my mom's address. And because it's Tia, it was just like, whatever, I gave her the address. And my mom had never stepped foot in the community, but she knew about the community. And she was just talking to me on the phone one day, and she said, I got to send your church a thank you card because they sent a gift card to me, money, and I was able to replace my mattress. And just this small community that we are, that is how impactful your investment is. It's not wasted in any way. Like the leadership was down at the George R. Brown giving out cash. And, when there's a need within the community, if we can support, we do. So I just want to let you know that you invest, it is used wisely. Sorry about my granddogs. They're riled up right now. So, so I just want to share that no one, again, is judging. So here, the June budget is $5,359, and the June giving so far was $3,104. So our July budget, and I believe it's carried over from the June budget that we didn't meet, is now $5,739. So everything that you give will be used to support the community, and you can give now. You can text to give. Is there a slide with the text to give? You can text to give. You can give on Cash App. You can give on Venmo. We have lots of ways. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Group Me, and we will get that information to you. So just wanted to share how the leadership here is really thoughtful, and we really are not only just a community for Houston, just a global community, and we really do believe in being the hands and feet of Christ and serving those in need.